Momentum looks active, but distance is not holding. Volatility expands inside the same session structure. Start from what is visible. Price is moving higher. It pushes across multiple sessions. The candles extend. The range appears to widen. But something does not continue. The move begins. Then it slows. Then it returns. Again and again. That repetition matters, because it shows movement without separation. Now look at where the move begins. The April 2nd U.S. session forms at the lower boundary of the March 27th U.S. session box. This location has already been tested before. It is not new. It is inherited. That is the first constraint. A session forming on an old boundary does not begin with open space. It begins with pressure already present. Then price lifts from that level. Momentum appears. The move extends upward. But where does it go? It goes directly into the upper boundary of the March 31st U.S. session box. And that same area aligns with the lower boundary of the March 30th U.S. session box. So the move is not expanding into new structure. It is traveling between existing ones. That is relocation. Relocation is movement inside structure. It is not structural change. So even though price moves, the environment does not. Now add the idea of compression. Compression is not just smaller candles. It is repeated formation inside the same boundaries. Each session forms closer to prior session edges. Each move starts with less available distance. Each reaction happens faster. Now look again. The lower side is still defined by March 27th. The upper side is still defined by March 31st and March 30th. So price is not free. It is contained. And that containment creates friction. Moves fail to hold distance. Continuation attempts stall earlier. Pullbacks extend deeper before stabilizing. Reaction becomes faster near both sides. Now the contradiction becomes stronger. Momentum exists. But it cannot persist, because every move meets a boundary that already holds memory. That memory absorbs the move and returns it. Again and again. Now consider how this affects execution conditions. Distance expectation compresses. Tolerance becomes narrower. Failure frequency increases. Holding pressure builds at every boundary interaction. The more times these levels are tested, the faster the reaction becomes. That reduces available time. That reduces available space. Now the structure is clear. Sessions are not forming independently. They are forming on top of earlier session memory. That is why the behavior repeats. That is why the move cannot escape. If sessions continue forming between the March 27th lower anchor and the March 31st upper overlap, distance remains limited. If price begins holding outside this inherited structure, instead of returning through it, tolerance must widen. Execution conditions remain in transition. Price continues to move, but structure continues to repeat. Now move forward through the sequence. The April 2nd Asia session forms inside existing structure. It does not create a new boundary. It forms inside the middle of the March 31st U.S. session box. That placement matters, because the session is not independent. It is anchored to prior memory, and that memory defines its behavior before the move begins. Now follow what happens next. After forming in that overlap, price moves lower. But the move does not extend into open space. It returns into another boundary. It tests the upper boundary of the April 2nd U.S. session box. Then it tests the upper boundary of the March 31st U.S. session box again. So even in decline, price is not escaping structure. It is reconnecting with it. That is repetition. Now move to April 3rd. The April 3rd U.S. session forms again on an existing boundary. It forms at the lower boundary of the March 31st U.S. session box. That is not random. That is alignment with prior structure. Then price lifts again. Momentum appears again. But the move follows the same path. It travels upward. Then it meets another boundary. It tests the upper boundary of the Asia session box and slows. That is the same pattern. Formation on memory. Movement inside structure. Return to another boundary. Now the behavior becomes more constrained. Moves fail to hold distance. Continuation attempts stall earlier. Pullbacks extend deeper. Reaction becomes faster and less stable. Each interaction happens sooner because the structure is tighter. Now the compression is not just visible. It is active. Distance expectation compresses further. Tolerance becomes tighter. Failure frequency increases. Holding pressure builds across all session boundaries. Now the important shift appears. The market is no longer expanding. It is negotiating inside structure. Each move is a reaction to prior memory, not a discovery of new space. If sessions continue forming inside this layered overlap, distance remains limited. If a session forms outside this structure and holds, without returning through it, tolerance must widen. Environment is still processing. Price is still moving. But nothing changes. Now look at the most recent formation. The April 5th Asia session forms between two existing references. It forms between the upper boundary of the March 31st U.S. session box and the middle of the April 1st U.S. session box. This is not empty space. It is already defined. So the session begins with limitation. Then price moves again. It moves lower. But the move does not extend freely. It reconnects with another boundary. It tests the lower boundary of the March 26th U.S. session box. So the sequence continues. Formation inside structure. Movement across structure. Return to structure. Again and again. Now all 5 axes are fully interacting through this repetition. Session defines the time anchor. Each session forms on prior memory. Volatility expands and contracts inside the same boundaries. It does not create new ones. Position shifts between upper and lower edges, but does not establish a new location. Pressure builds during movement, but releases when price returns. Interaction repeats at the same levels, faster each time. That is why the chart feels misaligned. Everything moves, but nothing separates. Now the behavior becomes predictable in form, but not in direction. Pullbacks extend deeper before stabilizing. Continuation attempts stall earlier. Reaction becomes faster near both sides. Distance expectation remains compressed. Tolerance remains narrow. Failure frequency remains elevated. Holding pressure continues to build across all boundaries. If sessions continue forming between these same references, distance remains limited. If price begins holding outside this inherited structure, without immediate return, tolerance must widen. Execution conditions remain in transition.